Christian parenting.
This is Cynthia Yanoff, and you're listening to Pardon the Mess. Each week we have honest discussions about the ups and downs of parenting and the lessons God is teaching us along the way. It's real, it's fun, and it's biblical. Life is messy. Don't walk the parenting road alone. Hey guys, welcome to Pardon the Mess. We are wrapping up February in our series of shows on loving the things that God loves. And we're going out with a bang because today we have Christy Nockels with us. And Christy is a singer, she's an author, she's a podcaster. She has a podcast called Glorious in the Mundane. And just most recently, she's released the book, The Life You Long For, that we'll be talking about today. She's been all over the world traveling with Passion Conferences and Louis Giglio, and just has an amazing heart for worship and an amazing voice to worship the Lord with. And so today she's with us as a mom of 3 and a wife, and she's talking about rest. And I know that God loves rest in our lives and surrender to Him. And so just what that's looked like in her life, a call to stop traveling and touring and to rest and be with her kids and her family, and how she was called into that. It's just really, I love what she has to say. And yes, it's personal to her, but it will speak to you as well. I know it will because it did to me. So here we go today with Christy Nockels. Hey, Christy Nockels, welcome to Pardon the Mess. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, I'm so excited to get to be a part of this and to meet you.
Well, you too. And so you're married and you have a couple of kids. Just give us a quick overview of your life.
Yes. So I've been married to Nathan for about 25 years, and we have 3 children together. We have a boy and 2 girls. They are 20, 18, and 13 now, if you can believe that.
20, 18, and 13. And so is that like college-ish, high school-ish, and then you've got a middle schooler?
Yes. So Noah, he is doing music full time.
Awesome.
He decided to do a gap year, and then he just was like, kind of has been hitting the ground running he's producing like my husband. And then 18-year-old, she's a senior, Ellie. She's our artist. She's like a painter and is so talented. And then we have an 8th grader, Annie Rose. So yeah, it's full on.
Okay, so you and I have this in common. I have a senior daughter that's senior in high school. I have an 8th grade son, and then I have a 4-year-old. So we diverge there. But yes, so I'm walking your road. And so let me ask you about parenting for a minute. With a senior in high school, I know you have one a little bit older, but as looking at a senior again, I don't know about you, but it tends to make me look at everything I've parented, everything I've done over the years. Have I done enough? Have I said it all? Have I taught the lessons? All that goes through your mind. As you do this with a senior, are there things that you think about or you look at that you're like, oh, before this kid leaves the house, we got to make sure we're clear on these things? Like, what does that look like in your mind?
Yes. Well, we definitely went through that with our son. He was the first one to turn 18. And I remember, I think I even say it in the book that it was like, I was like, should we literally make a list of like crash course? Like, what does he need to know before he leaves this nest? And then with a girl, so the next one who's going to leave the nest is a girl. And I would say that list is very different for guys and girls. So that's a thing too, of just like, okay, what she needs to know is just kind of really different than like how my husband would instruct Noah, like in the way he should go.
Share a little bit about what your careers look like, not just singing, but all around. But in doing so, what's been the biggest surprise that the Lord has unveiled in that? And what's been something that you're like, well, yeah, I always knew I could sing. I kind of thought this would happen, but I never expected this, or whatever that looks like.
Yes. Well, yeah. So I met Nathan when I was 19, and I was raised in a pastor's home, and I was raised singing probably from the time I was 7 on the stage because Dad was a pastor. And so that was just a natural platform for me to kind of work out my gifting in front of people, which was so precious looking back. And then when Nathan and I met, I had already been songwriting a little bit, but we sort of hit the ground running together. Is we were just kind of kids and we've grown up together in a way. We married at 21 and just were songwriting and kind of, we got a record deal pretty early on, like in our early 20s, with Michael W. Smith, who was like someone we were raised, listening to his music. He started a label called Rocketown Records, and we signed with them. And then we were a part of the very first Passion Conference, which was in 97 in Austin, Texas. And, we didn't know it, but that would grow into a 20-year journey where we were on their record label and we did a couple of world tours with them and traveling and, being a part of those conferences, getting to, sing over college students every year at their conference. But I think probably what surprised me the most is just the more that God has sort of brought me into a season of not just singing, but sharing and really, and doing some speaking even. I had no idea when I started a podcast probably 3.5, 4 years ago. I had no idea how much work it was. I probably wouldn't have started it if I knew.
Yeah.
But it's called The Glorious and the Mundane. And really what I was doing just in the beginning was and which is really what I do now. I think I do a little more teaching the Bible. And that's probably the most surprising thing that I find myself doing, and literally going, I didn't sign up for this, nor do I feel qualified for this. But I just kind of started out sharing what God was teaching me in like those middle minutes of like that nobody else sees. And parenting is so much of that, like just the work that no one else sees, but it is just such incredibly important work. And so I think probably the podcast would be the thing that I probably looked up and was like, what am I doing? I never, imagined myself doing that, but it really is such a sweet pairing with being a songwriter and singing, because it's almost like a songwriter's dream, and that you get to do stories behind the songs. It's almost like stories behind just life, like stories behind, taking care of a home and like taking care of kids and getting to kind of go deeper. And just, that's my wiring, is I love to be able to kind of just lead people to take an ordinary moment and sort of see God in it, like on a really deep level. And so that's probably surprised me the most, of just that I thought maybe I'd just be doing records, constantly, but it's just been so much more than just about music.
I was reading this and I wanted to read it out loud because I think it just, even before the book started, it stuck with me. And I think it's so true for so many of us. And you said, and for anyone who's tuckered out from trying and striving, those who feel like you're worth more when you do more and build more, and for anyone feeling small because you had to lay down what you were building, I get you. May you find true rest in the life that you are longing for. And so behind those beautiful words is obviously a story and a lot that God's done. And so you have this career, and we talk about the amazing way God's used you, but then your whole book is based out of a place of maybe the Lord saying, slow it down, sister, like let's make it about what it needs to be about. So share with us, what gets you to the point of being able to write that?
Yes. So the Lord started this journey for me when my kids were little. We just had 2 at that point. Noah was about 4 years old. Ellie, our 18-year-old now, was about 2.5. And the Lord just really allowed me, I guess, to come to a place where I was weary. I didn't know that a readied heart could look like an exhausted heart. But I think sometimes He allows that in our lives so that we can truly come to sort of this place where we get to the end of ourselves. And the Lord really used motherhood like that in my life. And I thought, that I could just have kids and just kind of strap them on my back and keep going, which you can do that when they're little. But when they start getting towards, when Noah was like getting ready to start kindergarten, and it was like, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to kind of find a base somewhere? And is he going to go to school? And it was sort of just life questions that sort of culminated into me having to make some choices And then there was this exhaustion that I was experiencing because we were just going full on. I mean, just a pace that wasn't going to be sustainable with littles. And so it was just sort of this perfect storm. And the Lord actually called me in that season to come home and take care of my kids exclusively for about 3.5 to 4 years, like literally lay down everything that I was doing. And it may not always be that drastic. I don't want to scare people.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, what I've learned is that rest comes from surrender and trust. And we laughed with my publishing team, that we couldn't put surrender and trust on the title because probably no one would buy it, because no one wants no one wants
Yeah.
to know how to surrender and trust. It's just hard for all of us, right? I mean, it's just what it's like universal that we deal with, surrender and trust. But it really does equal rest when we obey God in that way and we look to him for the unfolding of us rather than hustling for the unfolding of us. And what I found was that I was hustling, and hustling eventually ultimately holds us back, actually, from the life that we long for, because it prevents, I would go as far to say, because I saw it in my own life, that it prevents the supernatural work of God. Because when we relent and we surrender and we trust, it almost releases God to come through on our behalf. But he'll sometimes allow us to keep at that pace, to feel it, to feel that exhaustion, so that we will go, okay, Lord. And that's where I had to get to that place. I talk about it in my book. It's called, I say it's my farm table epiphany, where I was cleaning a toilet just before then, talk about the glorious and the mundane, just things happening in the middle of the mundane. But I sense this like deep sense of contentment and about being home. And I believe God leads us through our desires. And I think he was changing my desires in that season to come home and to learn what it would look like to just take care of my family first and to literally reorder my world, to come home, to take care of my kids, to really see them for who they are. I think at that point, like I said, I was just strapping them on my back and like toting them around,
Yeah.
everywhere. But just really just stop and learn to see them for the treasure that they are, and to see other people around us, their community, as the treasure that they are. And when he did call me home and I began to start learning to live from rest, that was one of the first, just, I think the fruit that came from it was that I just saw others for the first time almost. It seems like it was just like I was so consumed with like, okay, I got to do this, this, and this. I got to keep the calendar full. I got to keep this pace up. If I don't do this opportunity, then it's probably not going to open that door. But when I just like laid all that down and got out of the climb, it was like I could just see people for the first time and see my kids and my husband. And it changed my life. Obviously, I wrote a book. It took me 15 years to write the book, but I think it's because I was just supposed to keep living that before I was ready to really even just share about it. That was probably a bunny trail of answering your question, but
No, I love it. There's so much in there that I want to ask about, but a couple thoughts that made me think of that verse. I'm gonna paraphrase it and probably get it wrong, but that the yoke is easy, the burden is light. That whole sensation of if things are really heavy in life, especially when you're trying to live hard for the Lord and do the things He'd have you to do, then I think that's just always such a good place to stop and say, okay, like where am I in the hustle versus him? And I love that you're saying that only in slowing down and backing off can you allow the supernatural. That's where it comes in, which is what we want. We want Lord's best and his miraculous in our lives. But I love that whole concept of that we're missing it. Just practically speaking, and maybe you answered this when you were talking about your desires change, but what did it look like for you to know that you're called home versus what you were doing? Because I think sometimes we struggle with like, what do we call, what does it look like when God totally changes course? And I think it's unique for all of us, but what did that look like in your life?
well, I begin to, like I said, I think he really does lead by our desires. And so I think it's important, not that It's always that way. But I do think that it's great to pay attention to when your desires start to shift. I was in Psalm 37 at the farm table that day after I sort of had that toilet cleaning moment of just this sense of wanting to come home. I ended up literally doing one of those things where I went downstairs and I sensed his presence. It was like, okay, Lord, this is kind of weird. I was cleaning a toilet. I sensed you near. I feel like you were speaking to me. And I did one of those things where I just went downstairs and let my Bible open to wherever it fell open.
Yes, we've all done it.
I was just kind of desperate to hear from him. And it opened up to Psalm 37. And that is actually the passage of scripture, how I was saved when I was 7. And it was it was on a wall plaque in our house because we each had a wall plaque that had our name on it, the meaning of our name, and then a scripture. So mine said, Christy, follower of Christ. And it was paraphrased. It was like Psalm 37:5, commit your way to the Lord, trust also in him, and he will bring it to pass. Well, that's where I ended up in that morning. And I feel like God was really bringing me back to my gospel story so that it wasn't just for salvation, but it was like, oh, this is something I can live from. Like I can live the gospel every day and live from this place of trusting that. It goes on to say in verse 6 that he will make your righteousness shine like the dawn and the justice of your cause like the noonday sun. And I think one of those things, so the desire was to come home. So I noted that. It was like, why do I feel this all of a sudden out of nowhere? It was like we were on tours. I think even that happened when we were, literally we had come off the bus, come home to like kind of do some laundry and it was literally like between tour runs that we were home and this happened to me. And I just remember we had a lot going on. But I think another thing that I wanted and desired was just to be able to do normal things. And I know that like just the things that probably our neighbors or our friends would just be like, that's boring. But it was like, I remember at that time, a lot of my friends were having babies and it was just like, I could never be the one to like bake a casserole and like go do a normal thing, like deliver a meal to a friend, cause it was like, we just had what felt like all these demands, and I just wanted there to be some space and to be able to kind of do normal things, like literally just go on a walk in our neighborhood and let Noah learn to ride his bike. I mean, it was like literally we just were gone so much that we weren't able to just do some of those really normal things. And so I was just paying attention to that. But that verse, before 5 and 6, it's the one that's printed on a lot of tea towels and stuff, but it's like, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. And it was like, for the first time I saw that like as twofold. I'd always read that verse, since I was little as like, if I do this for God, then he'll do this for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as we mature, you kind of have these epiphanies in his word. And it's like, for the first time that word give kind of jumped off the page at me. It was like, if you delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart. As in, there's also a facet that he will show us what our desires are in every season. Like, meaning that desires will kind of come out of nowhere that we've maybe even never wanted or had before. And it just caused me to be able to like kind of stop and go like, okay, I need to take inventory, pay attention to what I'm desiring in this season. And I believe the Lord was like shifting things so that I could experience like a huge change in my life that honestly would end up changing our whole family's life,
Yeah. And so here's the thing. When you decide you're going to do something like that, no matter the level, anybody's listening to this is saying, okay, well, I'm not going to necessarily walk away from a huge record label or touring the country or whatever, but we're all called to walk away from something sometimes. And I think that it gets hard because so often our value becomes defined by what we're doing. And I know that's something that you've had to work through. I know we've all had to work through that. There's things that we let define ourselves. And so how did you work through that, especially when you're called back home, which, as we all know as moms, is about a lot of times the most thankless spot to be on a given day, most valuable, glad, wouldn't change a thing, but very thankless. And so how do you get around that when when your identity is based in something different, you're trying to walk away from it and you're going into a spot where it's oftentimes thankless.
It's so funny. Like I talk about that, and I think the third chapter maybe, and I'm like, I was almost embarrassed how brutally honest I was about how hard that was.
Yeah.
It was like, I so want to tell you, that that transition for me was smooth and that God had called me to do this, surrender and that everything was going to line up perfectly. But oh my goodness, it was hard. It was like, you're talking about the gears shifting and grinding, trying to go from, gear 5 down to like 1. And it was really hard. And I will say that probably in that was where a lot of, the refinement happened, as far as just me really having to allow myself to be seen by God in that thankless, just secret place was really, really hard. And I think a huge thing that had happened really was just that, like you're saying, I mean, my identity had become wrapped up in all that I was doing, and my worth really, I didn't realize it. I wouldn't, if you had asked me then, I would be like, no, my worth's not tied up in what I do.
Right.
But it
Right.
wasn't until it was stripped away that I was like, okay, I don't even know who I am
Mhm.
right now and how to even let God find me in this place. And so it was like gears, like grinding, like to get to this place of where literally before my feet would hit the floor in the morning, I would kind of go to that head space of getting, like, I'd have to just get my head on straight about who I am and whose I am, which is what I talk about a lot in the book, is basically identity. I think a lot of God calling me to come home to care for my kids was so that I would learn to be his kid again. Singing for God and doing things for God had become more important to me, whether I realized it or not, than just sitting with him,
Yeah.
being with him, delighting myself in him. Like literally, just like one of the things he said to me that morning, just in my spirit, was just like, just enjoy me. Do you like, just enjoy me? Like my
Mhm.
presence is better than life. Like my presence, in my presence is fullness of joy. And what would it look like for you to learn to just enjoy me? So it was like baby steps in those
Mhm.
moments. And it's a real thing, what you're saying, in that like thankless place, but looking back, I really do think it was in those moments that God started, as I started to treasure him, he entrusted me with treasuring what he treasures. And that started with my family.
Mhm.
And then it kind of permeated out from there, was like, oh, the treasure of this life isn't this brass ring of success and my dreams unfolding how I want them to. It's like the treasure in this life is Jesus, and then him entrusting us with his heart, which is his people, and treasuring the people that he's bringing into the vicinity of us, to care for.
Mhm.
And so in that season, it was really like this, him showing me what he values.
Yeah.
And what I learned too is just that if there's a hustle that holds us back, there's a rest that propels us. And what I started realizing is that's where that supernatural would come in. It was like the more I would rest, the more I would release and surrender and trust. It's like the more he would come through on my behalf. And literally, even with my career, he would do things that I would never have been able to organize or cause to fall into place. It was like I was watching him literally come through in ways that I never even could. And it was like a shift in that it was almost like you're not even dreaming big enough. Like I have dreams. It's like God has dreams for us that he is prepared in advance for us to walk in. That's Ephesians 2:10. And it's like almost like we don't even dream big enough when we're hustling. We're trying to get it done on our own. But it was like when I came home and I started just learning to be his kid and be seen by him in that place and just work it out. It was like I started to see him come through. And I've watched him. And I think that's another beautiful thing about it taking me 15 years to write this book is that over and over, he's restored and given back what I've laid down. And he's done it like 100-fold, but in a way that I could never have done or wouldn't even have wanted. It's like he does it in a way that's fulfilling. Yeah.
It's and you feel like you're making these big sacrifices, so to speak, for him. And, okay, I'm walking away or whatever, and how the Lord just honors that tenfold in ways that, you could have never produced on your own. And none of us could. Hey guys, I want to introduce you to our sponsor for today's podcast, embracemovement.com. Our daily faith routines often live separately from our health and wellness goals. Embrace Movement was founded to combine these two journeys into new workouts and faith talks for every day of your work week. Founded by 10-year personal trainer and CrossFit competitor Andrea Ager, Embrace Movement has created a community of passionate and godly women that inspire each other to build strength that lasts. As a mom, Andrea knows how to tailor workouts and nutrition for those juggling parenthood and their health. Daily topics range from how to pray when times are hard to how to safely work out when you're pregnant and everything in between. The daily workouts are for all fitness levels, encouraging us to accomplish our goals in a Christ-centered and holistic approach. Give them 30 minutes of your morning routine and you'll find yourself growing stronger physically and able to carry God's word throughout your day. Pardon the Mess listeners get 1 month free by using the promo code Pardon the Mess. Get more information at embracemovement.com. That's Embrace Movement, MVMNT.com. You talk about living inside out, not outside in. And so explain that a little bit. Help us walk that road.
Well, that same day, my farm table epiphany, when I was in Psalm 37, the Lord brought back to my mind this conversation that I'd had actually with my friend Lauren Chandler, who's an author and speaker, and her and her husband are in Dallas. And we had met around that time. Both of us were pregnant. She was pregnant with her first. I was pregnant with Ellie, my second. And I led worship one night at this event we were at in Texas, and she came up to me and she's like, okay, you're going to think this is really strange. But she was like, the whole time you were leading tonight, I kept closing my eyes and I was seeing this like bullseye, like a concentric circles, like a target sign, bullseye, concentric circles. She was like, and then the Lord just brought Philippians 2 to my mind. And no one had ever really shared a vision with me like that before. So I was kind of like, thanks. And I didn't know her very well. So I was just like, got it. Thanks. Kind of walked away, just sort of like, she's like, I don't know, just pray about it. I have no idea. Well, that day I was in the, had the toilet bowl cleaning moment, ended up, opening my Bible to Psalm 37. It was literally as I was reading God's word, it was like you could see this bullseye and concentric circles, almost like a transparency, like literally right there on the text. And that's when you can pretty much know that that's God confirming something when he does it through his word. And it was like, it came alive to me. And as he spoke to me after, he said, Christy, what if you just enjoyed me? What would it look like? And then he said, what would it look like, Christy, if you just hit the bullseye? Like just hit the bullseye with me each day, like just come home and just be my kid, live from me rather than for me. And if you did that, he's saying, I promise you, I'll take care of all the outer rings of your life and I'll show you my glory. If you will just trust me and you will just come and live from this place of rest and trust in me. And it was like, he's like, but Christy, you're stuck out here. You're like stuck in this outer ring of your life. You're running ragged. You're trying to call all the shots. You're trying to keep the calendar full. You're trying to keep food on the table and keep everyone happy, or all the people that are kind of, helping you do your life. And that's true for all of us, no matter what industry we're in. It's like you have those people who are counting on you for things, whether that's just your family today or your husband. And he's like, but you're out here and you're living from barrenness, like from the outside in, you're pushing in towards your family and towards me from this place of exhaustion. But he's like, what would it look like if you lived from the bullseye every day and then you moved out into the outer rings of your life, into your community, into the capacity to reclaim those outer rings with like purpose and intentionality. And that's what he showed me. So it's just sort of been like this. The bullseye's been like this life shape for me. I see it everywhere I go. I promise you, I was at the Western Wall in Israel. I'm standing there, the tour guide's talking, and I look on the Western Wall, and someone with a Sharpie had done a bullseye and like a target sign on the Western Wall. And I took a picture of it. I was like, it's literally everywhere I go.
That's amazing.
We probably all have those things, whether I know for a friend of mine, it's like trees. It's like, the rings inside of a tree or like the roots of a tree. It's just one of those things how God has spoken to me over and over about what it looks like to live from him rather than, for him pressing in. And so,
that's awesome. And it doesn't hurt that, Target has the bullseye, and who of us isn't at Target every day? So there you go. There's always that, Christy, on the less spiritual note. But one more question on that, and then I want to switch gears for a minute. But what did it look like when you were called to live in rest? Like, I'm thinking about that practically for myself and for others. And so there's obviously realities of kids, and maybe some people, there's realities that they have to work or whatever that may be, or they're not called in a season of not working. And so, I know in your life it was unique and it's different than what we're all called to, but what did that look like really practically in your life besides, walking away from the touring and all of that? How do we rest in the Lord?
Well, a few things. I'd been encouraged my whole life to have a quiet time by well-meaning teachers. And I'm actually sitting in my dad's office right now, just in case you're wondering why I'm in this like 70s looking office.
I love it.
He's been a pastor my whole life, and he's pastoring a church that's like 5 minutes from our house. And I come up here because we actually don't have internet at our house, not by choice, but just we live in the boonies. But, I was raised growing up in church, and, we just my whole life, it's like I was raised, like I said, just like I'm going to do these things for God, and I want to, serve him with my life. And, growing up, you kind of have this list of things that, you grow up doing. And should we have a quiet time? Absolutely. But what I've learned to look at that time as practically, and my brother, who's been just like an amazing mentor for me in living in rest, he was like, what if you, instead of checking the quiet time box off every day, what if that turned into this posture of like, you have to go there every day to remember. Like remembrance is huge. And like I said, just to kind of go there and get your head on straight. And so I started viewing my time with God differently. And I think that's one practical way that we can live in that bullseye place. And one of the ways I've done that is really like, I look at it like that we become the quiet time. So, I start a conversation with him in the morning that I plan to continue throughout the day. And that's one thing that I'd never really done before was, the Bible even says pray without ceasing. And you're just like, how in the world is that possible? Yeah. We obviously can't run around with our heads bowed and our eyes closed. But just really starting that conversation. So for moms who, or if you've got a full-time job, that could be use your time, use your commute. There's nothing wrong with that. For you to literally turn off the radio and use what time you have to communicate with God. Like, I mean, like make your mouth to say words out loud. And I just think we hold so much in. And we don't express to God, like we don't just, but we are literally, I mean, that's the Psalms. If you don't know where to start, even in, a quiet time, start with the Psalms. Talk about David, who figured out how to talk to God. That's what the Psalms are. It's like 150 poems and songs of the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. It's like, it's real life for all of us. Like we can literally just go there if that's where, and if you even just have 5 minutes in the morning, then it could look like you continue your conversation for 10 minutes more when the kids are down for a nap or you have lunch break or whatever. So it's more just like, what if we looked at that? Like, can't, I mean, I have a friend, Megan, who is so like, she's got 4 kids and it's like, she's like, she does need to get up at a certain time. Cause she's like, if I don't get my head on straight, I literally can't do the rest of my day. Whereas I'm a little more artisty about it. I'm a little more like, I'm going to take 5 minutes here. I'm going to also get 5 minutes here. When I have my commute, I just drove 30 minutes cause I had another thing before this and I prayed for my parents the whole way. So it's just kind of really making that space to talk to God. And don't worry if you're needing to just do that during real practical things like a traffic jam, So that's one thing. Yeah. Just remembering it each morning, but don't make it rigid. Yes. Should we do Bible studies? Yes, of course. But if you can't do that right now, it's also just as amazing if you take that 5 minutes to just honestly pour your heart out to God. And then I would say like our yeses and nos are huge. Like living from God, it's like we really do. I've learned you have to protect time to rest. So if you do have a full-time job, find that time that you can rest and just literally guard it, like protect it so that you can have that time because you really will be replenished and renewed and restored. And that's so important for us to do that, even if it's just like protecting, 30 minutes on a Saturday. If you need to have a friend come and watch the kids so you can just take a walk, whatever it is, like I think protecting that. And then with our yeses and nos, this is another thing that my brother challenged me with. He literally mentored me like when I was in my young 30s of resting and what that would look like. And one of the things he said was, we have the Spirit of God in us. And there's the scripture, I think it's Isaiah where it says, you stand before the crossroads and you look to the left and the right and there's a voice behind you that says, this is the way, walk in it. And so we do have that, we have the Spirit of God in us. And often I started taking I was paying attention to and I still do it when opportunities come my way. Often I'll get an opportunity that'll come and sometimes you just can't do it because the calendar's full. So if someone's listening and you've asked me to come, do something, it's not because I didn't want to, but just sometimes.
Sure. We're all mad, Christy, but go on.
But sometimes you'll get an opportunity that comes your way and it might look good on paper. It might actually look really good on paper or like for your career or a great opportunity, but something in you is like, you feel guilt. You feel almost tired before you've even done it. You feel like you're just like, kind of like that dread. That is the Holy Spirit in you saying, if you are a believer and you have him in your heart, it's like he's saying, that's not the way you should go. And I've started paying attention to that. And then there's opportunities that's almost unexplainable because it doesn't look maybe that great on paper, but something in you is like, there's life before you even do it. You're like, to get to do that would be amazing. And I just believe that, what God has us walk in brings life. Yeah. And so listening to the Holy Spirit, not letting your feelings be your guide because, like I said, sometimes it's maybe not like what makes sense on paper, but you just know by that, like sort of life-giving sense of like, I feel like restored even before I'm a part of that. So I just think that's a couple of practical ways that I've learned to kind of flesh that out in my real life, in my everyday life. Our yes and no's and kind of protecting our rest. Yeah.
I think that just, it's so good. It makes me just think about, growing up in a Christian home and always being told about the quiet time, as I've grown up, how important that is. And just and just listen to you speak. Like, I feel like you just gave me permission to do it differently. I'm already trying I try to read through the Bible every couple of years. I'm already behind. And this morning I was up and dealing with, kids and all this. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be another day behind this. And it's a box to check that is so unnecessary. And that's living outside in instead of inside out. And just like the Lord just just wants us to rest in him. And I think we're well intentioned and we miss it. And so I think that's just a great word for all of us. Individually, I think even today, as I was like, oh, I'm so far behind and I can't keep up with it. And that's a great word. And so let's wrap up with this. I know that you had a health scare that was a kind of a forced slowdown at one point in your life. I think we've all had a forced slowdown this last year with COVID. I know probably especially you felt that in your career with live music and all of that. But I just keep feeling like called to go back into life, merge back into it better than how I was wiped out of it, and to go back and make my yeses be significant yeses and my no's be the no's that need to be there. And I think we all feel that way and just wanting to do it better. And this is not a slowdown I think any of us wanted, but at some point, God willing, life will resume. And so what would be your best advice as we start thinking towards working back into the pace of life that we used to be in? What are you looking forward to, and how are you going to do it in your own life well? And how would you encourage us to do that as believers?
Well, I would say really kind of as I was saying before about like kind of taking inventory of where you are after all of this. I think it's just even important like to journal those things like, okay, making sure before, if the pace starts cranking up again, before that even happens, it's like, what if you were to kind of even journal, okay, like what do I long for? Like what is the life I long for? Like what are the things that I want to hold dear and cherish and like we're talking about seniors leaving home. It's like you just, you want to do those things well. And so I think it's so important to just kind of take stock of those things and just to know like right now the season that Nathan and I are in, it's just like we kind of have identified those things and we know like, okay, these are the places that we're not willing to budge. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then it kind of helps you be able to take on a little bit more. I also think that one of the things the Lord is teaching us in the last probably 5 years of our lives is really, and there ended up being, it was kind of last minute, but there ended up being a whole chapter on it in my book. It's called The Power of Small. And I think that for a while, at least, it's going to be like baby steps, I think, in starting up businesses again, or even the church. And I think to not be afraid of small and to really know that God can do miraculous things in the small. And we've really watched him do that. And it's made us look at our life and our little community and in a different way, in a space that like he could actually come and do miraculous things. I mean, just part of we lead at this church that I'm sitting in on Sundays, and it's 60 people. It's the smallest church we've led in since we were, 22 years old. And there's been like something really life-giving in it. And it's very far from, the passion world and, 50,000 people in an arena. But there's been something equally as fulfilling and powerful in it. And so I would just encourage people to just not be afraid of it looking different, and even looking small as we go in. One of the things that I was so blown away, we got to go to Israel in November, right before I'm at the end of the year in 2019. And thankfully we got to go over there, and I was blown away. Literally, I could not get over how small it was. Everything was so small. And so Jesus's framework, I saw the Sea of Galilee where he calmed the waves, and it looks like the childhood lake of my summers. Like you could paddleboard from one side to the other. And it just gave me a different appreciation for his commands and his call on our lives. Like, so when he says, love God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself, you're just literally like, wow, our small is like gloriously familiar to him. And like, that was the framework we get these Americanized sized dreams of, giantness. And it just was refreshing to me to just be like, you know what? He gets small. Like his ministry was like face to face. And I hope that we won't lose that, because we've had a lot more of that, I think, is just we've had a lot more of those small groups or even just what we're doing. And it's powerful. He can work through it in miraculous ways. So I hope we're not afraid of it looking different.
That's amazing. Christy Nockels, I'm so thrilled to get to chat with you. The book is A Life You Long For. We're going to put it everywhere, social and podcast notes and everywhere, so people can link to it and get it. And just thanks for taking time and driving to your dad's office to just take the time to be able to chat with us. That means a lot, and we're just grateful for your ministry. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I so appreciate it. It was so fun.
A big thanks to Christy Nockels for being with us today. And I know what stuck with me in our conversation was just living from the inside out and how often we live from the outside in. And when you're living from the inside out, you're living from the places God's ordained for you, and you're spending time with Him and you're led to rest, how He works in places you never could have hustled your way to. And I think it's a good word I needed in my life. Slow down, rest in the Lord. I know that the Lord loves us to be submitted to Him and resting in Him. I'm glad you were here. Stay tuned for March. We've got a new series coming your way. We know your days are busy, so as always, thank you for joining us as we pardon the mess.